The Daymar Rally is not just a race, it's a 500-kilometer endurance-based test of survival that challenges you with canyons, mountains, boulders, enemy gunfire, and the threat of pirates, as you contend with an overheating vehicle and the constant day-night cycle of the rotating moon. This is not an easy event to compete in, and for many it's an entirely new form of eSports. After covering this race last week, I'd like to show you what occurred, and why this is such an interesting spectacle. This is the Daymar Rally 2022. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. There are over 512 racers involved in this in-game event in 140 different teams from 27 countries on 13 servers. Taking the preparation for something like this lightly could end in a disaster. And while there are always some hiccups, event founder Corsair and his team begin preparation for this race almost a year in advance. So when the racers are rolling up to the line in spaceships coming from various planets and support vehicles coordinating with them, everything runs pretty smoothly. And as the teams in my server lined up to go, I could tell they had all done this before. While official signups are only hosted in December, the teams have been attending unofficial and official races for months, learning the route, understanding the dangers of the land, and developing a strategy for if pirates show up. That's right, this is an emergent event. Whatever happens, happens. I've filmed this event for 3 years, and almost every year I've seen pirates wreak havoc on racers. Whether somebody manages to sneak out onto the course with a sniper, or a bomber makes it to the surface, if it happens, it happens. Luckily, the crew contracts out security work to various player-run orgs, but the risk is always there. Back to the race, after a rather interesting start on my server which sent all racers off in various directions, the pack quickly spread apart. And while this initial start isn't incredibly important in the grand scheme of things, it certainly helps to get out ahead in the dark of night 1. The first segment of land was filled with a mixture of small rolling hills and crisscrossing canyons. While not the easiest terrain, it was certainly not the hardest, and with such close proximity at the beginning of the race, vehicles had a chance to trade some shots with each other and their support ships overhead. But this didn't last very long, and as the morning approached, players focused on making progress and pushing forward to the first large plain that needed to be crossed. This plain was located in the first of 2 legs totaling 510 kilometers as the Pico flies. The first waypoint is an aid shelter, which requires players to enter and report in before continuing on. Overall, our racers had a long way to go. Before long into day 1, the positions of each racer were becoming clear, with as much as 25 kilometers between first and last place in the server. But there was a lot that could change these standings, one of those things being the terrain. With a rather low gravity rating of 0.35 G, Daymar makes it hard to keep traction. A lot of time can be wasted by driving too quickly and gaining too much air. This can also leave you vulnerable to hitting rocks and other obstacles as you fly through the air yelling at the computer screen. Navigating such bumpy terrain, especially at night, with this sort of annoyance can make or break your chances of winning. And then, there are the biomes. For a moon that seems so easily described by a couple of words, it really does display a nice variety of biomes to keep the race interesting to look at and experience. As the first place team in my own server rounded the first checkpoint to start on the longer second leg of the race, we had already flown through multiple of these biomes and the second night, and were well into day 2. The distances were much greater between racers and the strategies had differed. My own organization, the Garden Interstellar Initiative, had 2 teams in the race. One team took a wide right and went around the canyons and hills that interlinked the middle of the path. The other team hung slightly to the left for a more direct and difficult route. This ultimately had both teams reach the first checkpoint at similar times, which worked well for either of their situations. Meanwhile, in the back of the race, we began to see our first racers dropping out. See, there's a big flaw with these vehicles right now. They stop working after a certain amount of time from spawn. So no matter what, you're always racing against time. And if for whatever reason you don't have a support ship or your support ship goes down, you're left to run. And people do, until they run out of oxygen and the in-game oxypens don't work. Yeah, there are still issues running something like this in an alpha. Regardless, as racers began dropping out a bit before the halfway point, players were still racing hard up front. This deep into the race, teams were generally dozens of kilometers away from one another, but I actually managed to catch a pretty long-running feud between two trucks in the dead of night. It started as an ambush attempt as Prophetic Industries Racing realized it was time to trade out their vehicle and thought they could slow down the competition. The ensuing battle with Team Ferric was a long-distance, high-speed, long airtime firefight between the two teams as they bounced their way across the dark hills and dashed laser shots off each other's shields. It continued for several minutes with little mini-events sprinkled throughout. At one point, the original attacker lost a player who could only help by launching animus rockets as they were left behind. Ultimately though, as the sun began to come up and the desert began to heat, while still fighting, our original ambusher was forced to make an escape in order to change out rovers and pick up their driver. This was a lead that was never gained back. By the time they returned to the race, they had fallen behind 5 kilometers. And thus is the struggle of the Daymar Rally. Well into the next day, the trucks were dropping out like flies. First place continued to push ahead, followed by several other teams, but throughout the day, team after team succumbed to the desert. While one of my organization teams had to bow out, they had made the decision to leave an extra truck parked out on the course. While most racers had ended up on foot and dehydrated or run out of oxygen, our last racer was able to make a run to that parked rover, marked by the supply ship. This was a pretty key moment, as the first place team was 30 kilometers ahead on foot, and the next racer was 5 kilometers ahead in a truck. The race was on. And it wasn't long before second and third place caught up to the leader on foot. As all teams passed through a segment of canyons, it was clear the foot racer would end up in the back. There was still a pretty decent gap between the two trucks still racing, but by this point it was down to a 2-truck race on this server. Unfortunately, after not too long, that second rover we had grabbed gave out, and the team was down to the foot race as well. This, in time, would lead to the Garden Interstellar eventually falling out of the race. First place was still pushing on for a while after this, and even eventually got stuck after an unfortunate jump. The team was well prepared though with another truck, and continued on for the entire day, driving through new biomes, crossing even more canyons, and making their way into the 5th night. But over time, despite the continued effort from this team that would take first place on the server, it became apparent the race would end with none of the teams on this server taking a top spot. See, there were only 8 truck teams on this server, but all 29 teams were racing simultaneously against the clock on other servers, and the leaders of those servers had already finished. While the truck division I was in saw winning times of about 5 hours, the buggy division sat at about 3.5 hours, and the bike division at 1 hour. The trucks were the long-haul endurance race, and there are many aspects of the game that are not yet ready that will help the survivability portion of this race truly shine. The creators are hoping to include refuel and repair gameplay as soon as it's ready, and they hope server meshing could eventually help the various groups consolidate a bit more for more exciting races. This is only the beginning of these open boundary, completely live eSport events in Star Citizen, and every year it becomes more clear that it will end up being a major part of the game. And so another year of the Daymar Rally is behind us. While my own server was not as eventful on the piracy front, I've definitely seen my fair share in the past, and I heard other servers might not have fared as well as us. If you haven't caught my initial documentary with Imperial Geographic, I'll link it down below for you. And make sure to check out my channel for the full stream of this event if you want to see all the crazy shots and events that didn't make it into this video. Or if you want a more in-depth look at this event, other player-run events, and how players are shaping Star Citizen, I'll be releasing my second supporter-exclusive video looking at the topic at the end of this month. So consider hopping on Patreon or becoming a channel member down below to get more videos every month. Also, for the next couple of weeks, I'll be running a new giveaway. I've partnered up with MSI and Azatec to give away an MSI Core Liquid K360 CPU cooler to a member of the Garden community. This should help in alleviating your CPU from the horrid torture that Star Citizen likes to put our computers through. Head over to my website for this and more using the link down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. and I'll catch you in the next one.